Thank you for inviting me. And this is the informed lay person's gallop through a 35-year adventure. And the genesis of this conference today was actually Nikki throwing down a gauntlet to me about 4 years ago, saying, "Karin, if you feel this passionately about it, organize a conference." Now, I have a head full of ideas, but I don't have the organizational skills or the resources. And Geraldine said to me last year, let's combine our resources and do this. So here we are today, and now there's 250 people, which is absolutely wonderful. So here we go. It's very simple. I want to ask you and then tell you what I think about what's special about the North Georgian core, why it's worth saving. I would like to tell you our vision, and by our, I'm talking about the Mountjoy Square Society. I'd like to share some of the impediments to realising that vision, and then I'd like to tell you about a couple of exciting developments on the square. So, the first thing I'm going to do is ask you, what is the North Georgian core? How do we define it? What's its boundary? Actually, a lot of the time I think the North Georgian core is a black hole in the imagination. Now, I'd like to tell you about my North Georgian core. That's it. It's quite extensive. It's not absolutely intact. It's a bit fragmented, but there's a lot of it still there. And I would start by standing in front of the GPO, an iconic early 19th century building that has resonances from many, many different traditions. There it is, and then we're going to head up to the rotunda where we're sitting. A wonderful opportunity to see this room again. Last time I was here was about 30 years ago during a concert in Great Irish Houses. The whole complex, the Gate Theatre, the Garden of Remembrance, Parnell Square. I pinched this image, I hope I'll be forgiven. But we're thrilled that it's coming to the north side and that Parnell Square is going to be the city's cultural hub, whereas the national cultural hub is in the Kildare Street block. The Hugh Lane, the Writers' Museum, the Writers' Centre. I've missed out a couple of things here. I couldn't find an image of, and I couldn't take an image with so much traffic of 42 O'Connell Street, which Nikki mentioned. I'd also like to mention the little church, is it by Hickey? The little St. Thomas's Church, which won the first RIAA gold medal in, I think, 1937, being carefully minded by a Christian group, and I'm sure with the right approaches could be borrowed occasionally for concerts and things. Blessington Basin, if I had cash to spare, I'd whip up a few houses up there and be delighted to live there either. There's a whole hub of Georgian hotel accommodation, which, as far as I know, isn't marketed strategically at all. It's of variable quality, but it's there to be built on, and I think it's very important. And I should just say that my background, I've had a varied career. My background, I started out in the hospitality industry. I then trained as an Alexander Technique teacher. I then studied psychology, and now I find myself back in the hospitality industry, which I'll come to in a moment. I understand that the Belvedere Trust are possibly thinking of opening Belvedere House. I'm sure the stabilisation things must be almost finished by now. Phase dancing shoes. This is a gem. This could be wonderful. And that allows me to say that I think we should be somehow or other finding the €1 million that it's going to cost to get the Dublin Civic Trust's revolving fund going again, and that should be project number 1. And it could be turned into a boutique, 2 apartments for literary aficionados, and it could be carefully marketed, and I reckon you could take over, you could save the whole of that beautiful terrace by extending it to the upper floors of those buildings which are derelict. And unprotected. We'd love to see them protected. We've been told that they will, but it hasn't happened yet. St. George's Church. I thought I might have brokered a deal to get Airbnb in there, but they took the safe option and went down to the Google Gulag in Barrow Street. but it was worth a try. The James Joyce Centre, dark space, privately run architectural exhibition space, run wonderful series of talks, great asset to the city. This is a really important church. Anyone ever been in St. Francis Xavier, Upper Gardiner Street? The first post-emancipation church built on a main thoroughfare in Dublin. Probably it was a Jesuit church. It only became a parish church in about 10 or 11 years ago. And I'm sure Daniel O'Connell had something to do with that decision because he was advising the Jesuits at the time. And up to my little patch, which is Mountjoy Square. That's Georgian Dublin, but that's the North Georgian city, but it's fragmented and it doesn't read like that. I could bring you out and sell you that story, but most people don't get it. And it's partly to do with a poorly presented public realm, and it's a management issue. I don't even believe it's particularly a monetary issue. I think it's management. And I think there's a kind of learned helplessness about parts of the city, that they're problem areas and that, you know, they're best shunned, or, you know, you go in and you do the little bit that you think you can do and that you can achieve. But I think unless we get some kind of an overarching task force to deal with all this and bringing in the expertise of lots of different bodies, I think there's a role for Fáilte Ireland here. And I think possibly tourism is one of the ways that the economic potential of the area could be achieved. We have it all. We know what to do, but somehow or another there is a lack of will and a lack of, I don't know, daring, bravery, courage. We have it all. I was at the Urban Conservation Conference in Dublin Castle very shortly after I arrived back in San Francisco, having lived there for 10 years. And I came out of there saying, yes. And I think she was Mary King, was the conservation officer from Liverpool, who gave an electrifying talk on how to manage problematic inner city, and there I'm slipping into the habit of using that dreadful word that came from American sociological theory in the 60s, but how to manage city centre residential historic property. And she described a model where they mapped it all. They went down the first street with a carrot and a stick, and a big carrot and small stick, and they picked up the first amenable X percentage of owners on the street, and they got them going. And then 6-9 months later, they came back and they started applying a bit more stick, and they got another few. They said, come on now, your friend's doing this, it's paying off for him, get to it, and we will help you. We will give you advice, we will give you grants, we will support you. And then they moved on to the next street, and they did the same thing. And the interesting thing is they came back at least twice more and did another sweep. And by the end of the exercise, they had brought the vast majority of those property owners on board. And I keep meaning, I still haven't managed to get and go and look at it, but you know, I think that's a model we could learn from. And then from my point of view, my parents sent me out to buy them a small house within walking distance of Stephen's Green in 1977. And they were living in the States. They had cash. They had an amount of cash. They couldn't borrow money there to spend here, and they couldn't borrow money here because they weren't living here. So we had cash, and I went out looking at houses in Vernon Street and Heytesbury Street or whatever, and we just kept missing. Anyway, the poor woman, for whatever reason, ended up with a house on Mountjoy Square that had a closing order on it. It was the final house of the Mountjoy Square Estates portfolio, which had been, that came from Matt Gallagher's site assembly. He had the ambition to demolish practically the whole thing and put up 4 slab office blocks. And Marie Guinness in 1966 or 1967 managed to buy number 50 under his nose and disrupt his plans. And she was a thorn in his side for the next X number of years. And eventually, he sold them to the Mountjoy Square estates for $69,500, 22 houses and sites. And when I arrived in Mountjoy Square, my family bought house number 22, and Mountjoy Square Estates was wound up. And between 1978, June 78, and February 85, we had lost another 7 houses. And I was rehearsing this to friends last night, and my friend's husband stopped me and he said, "Say that again?" He said, "That's more than 10%. So he said, "You're telling me in 7 years, what had survived for nearly 200 years was wiped out." And yes, that's true. And it's shocking. And then came these incentives and the incentives and the results of the incentives. And now we are looking at a square which is complete, which is great, but those blocks are problematical. They are too big, they are poorly managed, the specification was very low, and at one stage, I think in 1984, I went to a conference organised by Hook and MacDonald, and I buttonholed a planner, and I said, we need to build extra good housing in these areas, not substandard housing. And she looked at me and she said, I'd been haranguing her for quite a while now, so she was fed up. And she said to me, "Look, the attitude is in here. Anyone who's brave enough to go into Gardiner Street, let them at it." But I live with the consequences of planning decisions that were made in the 90s, and they're an annoyance, not enough to make me leave, but they are a serious annoyance. Because they're all single aspect. They are, I think the first lot were 327 square feet, and I think it then went up to 460. They're now occupied, a certain percentage of them are now occupied by maybe 4 or 5 people, which is much more than they were ever meant to be occupied by, and a largely transient population. We think there are no owner-occupiers in number 52 or number 55, and there's one lone owner-occupier in number 62, and I don't know about the other blocks. I would say there's probably less than 20 owner-occupiers of infill apartments on the whole square. So that's the square in 1990, I think about 1990, and you can see the dereliction in this corner and on the southwest corner as well. And there's some nice original houses. I'm not sure which side they're on. I think they're on the south side. No, they're on the east side, excuse me. There's Mariga making her plea. That's number 50. That house that was one of the 7 houses that went after I came to Mountjoy Square. That went it went in about 1983. I was working in Ballymaloe House in the summer of 1982, and I got a phone call from my brother one Thursday evening, and he said, "You better come home. What are you doing for the weekend?" And I said, "Well, I was going to stay in Cork." And he said, "You better come home. There are guys up on the roof punching holes in the roof of number 50. So I got into my car after the end of my shift, and I drove home, and I didn't know what to do. I was about 23 or 24. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what to do. And Frank MacDonald had been writing articles in the Irish Times, and I rang Frank, and I was practically incoherent. And he kept saying to me, slow down, I'm listening to you, slow down." Anyway, he wrote about it. The council got involved. They were stopped. But notwithstanding that poor building was, he reminded me last night, dragged down a couple of years later by a chain and hawser after it had been condemned as dangerous. That's the building I live in. That's it in 1978, and that's it today. This is the only surviving piece of Georgian pavement on the city, and there are city officials here who are sick of hearing me going on about this. It's only there because I do a song and dance every time I catch sight of a serviceman of any kind, and I've threatened to camp in a deck chair in a sleeping bag. But notwithstanding that hole under the Scotch standard has been there for 2 or 3 years. The cover on the water mains point is broken, and it has been infilled with Chinese granite. I had a huge row over that. The poor guy was so upset by what I said to him, that he came back a few days later with Modern Chinese Planet. And I came back and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm repairing it." And I said, "I don't want that rubbish. I want my original stones back. Where are they?" Oh, he says, "They're up in Barrow Street somewhere. I couldn't find them now." I have to comment on this. I was seriously ill when this planning permission was going through, or I'd have had a war dance about it. That is 140 single aspect, one-bedroom apartments. And one of my neighbours told me this morning that she has it on reliable information that Focus Point are taking the whole lot for homeless accommodation for single men. I actually don't believe that, because the tenants who are in Father Scully House are temporarily accommodated in a block in Foley Street, and I hope to God they're going back there, and they'll be devastated if they're not going back there. But the bulk of it, my yard is now in shade. You know, it's another annoyance, I can live with it. But it does have an economic impact, and when my turn comes to pass that house on, it'll be that little bit less attractive for that. And I don't see why it had to be a story over everything else. You know, stories. It's about 6 or 7 stories at that point. It's like a cliff face. And it towers over the beautiful little 1930s block, which is much beloved by the residents, which is at the other end of Temple Lane. And I want to talk about I'd like to just throw you out a question. Anyone have a hazard guess at how many people live on Mountjoy Square? And I'm going to tell you, it was over 1,500 at the last census. And when you contrast that to the South Georgian city, where there are 800 and something people living in the entire South Georgian city, Mountjoy Square is the most densely populated area in the entire state. And we have tremendous social capital in the area. This is a shot from the 40s of Tops and Pops, which the grandmother of the current owner started. They came from Cavan in 1931, and she opened a shop. Her son, Terry, took it over from her in 1958, and Terence took it over when his father died 5 or 6 years ago, and one of the young college kids in the family is there on Saturdays. I mean, this is social capital that is so precious. His shop was burnt out twice in 1 week when the block was being developed around him, because he was the only leaseholder and he was in their way. And thank God he prevailed. There he is there. 2 minutes. Okay. I'm going to fly you through this. Foley's Pharmacy, trading since 1929. I think there's a 4th, if not a 5th generation there. Problems. Where do you think this is? It's worthy of Calcutta. That's on Mountjoy Square, and that's the work of Mr. O'Connor, who is a vandal. And his latest insult is that he has punched out a waste from a kitchen sink into an area. He's just discharging it into the winter sink. He is operating on planning permission that expired in 1995. We have made, I don't know how many complaints, and nothing seems to be done. He just seems to be, that's fine. And my real concern is that the enforcement and planning is being unevenly enforced. I mean, I have neighbours who are working on Mountjoy Square. They're investing $2.5 million, and, you know, it's not easy. And yet this man can do what he likes. I mean, he's just strip mining the property. This is another house. We call this locally the Pigeon House. I'll just flick through them. But we have treasures. We have treasures beyond belief. We have 6 houses by Frederick Darley, stone cantilever staircases, plasterwork by Charles Thorpe, suites of original fireplaces, original tuck pointing. You can't replicate that. It is precious beyond. This is the house next door, another Darley house. That's Stapleton's house, number 39. We are delighted with our new lights on our Scotch standards. The square is complete. The Mountjoy Square Society are proud of our early victories. This is what we were living with. This is what brought us together. Bernadette Manning emailed people around and said, "We have to deal with this." We were told we'd never get rid of them. And that picture was taken this morning. I still get the finger from Matthew's drivers, and they try to run me down when they see me, but, you know. we run events in Mountjoy Square. We know there is an appetite for an appreciation for these houses. This is a concert, a drawing room concert in Garrett's house. We're now working with a wonderful young woman called Anya Niconry, who is programming for us. And our chairman is not above getting his hands dirty. That's spring clean a couple of years ago. And we'd love you, any of you who'd like to come and see us tomorrow. We're doing 2 walking tours, one at 10 and one at 2. And we are, and there's one other house open for 4 hours. And we'd love to see you. Thank you.